remember that drive like it was yesterday, even though according to my phone it was 3 years ago. I'd made that trip through the Smoky Mountains at least a dozen times before, always taking the same route from Knoxville to Asheville, a familiar stretch of highway that wound through the kind of dense, ancient forest that makes you feel small and insignificant. It was late October, and the leaves were past their peak, a carpet of brown and orange covering the shoulders of the road. The sky was that particular shade of gray that threatens rain but never delivers. And I had the radio tuned to some old country station that kept cutting in and out with static. I wasn't in a hurry, just enjoying the solitude, the way the mountains seemed to swallow the world and leave only the road and the trees. That's when the GPS interrupted my thoughts. A pleasant, robotic voice I'd heard 100 times told me to take the next exit. I glanced at the screen, and there it was, a new road I'd never noticed before, a thin gray line branching off from the familiar route. It was odd because I knew this highway well, and I'd never seen that exit. But the GPS insisted, recalculating with that little chime, that means you're about to miss your turn. I sighed and flicked on my blinker, thinking maybe it was a new bypass that would save me some time. The exit ramp was pristine, the asphalt so dark and smooth it looked wet. Even though the sky was dry, the lines on the road were a shocking white, freshly painted, and there were no other cars in sight. A strange feeling settled in my gut as I drove down the ramp, a feeling that I was leaving something behind, something I wouldn't be able to find again. The road twisted and turned, cutting deeper into the forest, and the trees grew thicker, their branches reaching out to scrape against the roof of my car. The GPS voice was silent now, the screen showing a blank gray expanse where the map should be. I drove for about 10 minutes, the silence growing heavier with each passing mile. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the crunch of my tires on that impossibly new pavement. The forest was too still, no birds, no rustling of leaves, just an eerie, watchful quiet. And then the road just stopped. There was no warning, no guardrail, just a solid wall of kudzu, a thick green curtain that looked like it had been growing there for a century. I slammed on my brakes, my heart hammering in my chest, and stared at the impenetrable greenery. But there was something else there too. Off to the side of the dead end was a rest area. It looked like it had just been built, the concrete gleaming, the building pristine, the glass windows spotless. There were no cars, no people, just this perfect, sterile little oasis in the middle of nowhere. I got out of my car, my legs feeling shaky, and walked toward the building. The air was cold and still, and I could hear the faint hum of the vending machines inside. The bathrooms were immaculate, the floors so clean they reflected the fluorescent lights, the sinks polished to a mirror shine. It was unsettling, this level of cleanliness in a place that felt so utterly abandoned. I bought a soda from one of the machines, the can cold and perfect in my hand. I stood there, sipping it, trying to make sense of my situation, when I heard the sound of an engine, a low, sputtering cough that didn't sound like any modern car. I turned, and a rusted-out sedan from the 1970s was pulling into the lot. It was a hulking, beige beast, covered in rust and grime, with a cracked windshield and a dented fender. It rolled to a stop a few feet from my car, and the engine coughed once, twice, and then died. The driver's door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a dirty, ill-fitting suit, the kind you'd find in a thrift store, and his face was a mask of polite confusion. He had thinning hair and tired eyes, and he stood there for a moment, looking around at the empty rest area, the wall of kudzu, as if he was as lost as I was. He walked over to me, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. "Excuse me," he said, his voice raspy and thin. "Could you tell me the time?" I pulled out my phone. "It's a little after 3, I said. He nodded, a sad, knowing look on his face. "They always get the road wrong," he said. more to himself than to me. He turned and walked back to his car, his shoulders slumped. I watched him get in, and then he did something that made my blood run cold. He put the car in gear, and with a low rumble, he drove straight toward the wall of kudzu. I opened my mouth to scream, to warn him, but the words died in my throat. The kudzu didn't stop him. It didn't even slow him down. The car just went through it, like the wall was a painting, an illusion. There was no sound of crashing, no tearing of vines, just a soft sucking sound, and then he was gone. The kudzu was undisturbed, as if the car and the man had never existed. I stood there frozen, my soda can growing warm in my hand. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that impossible wall of green. Finally, my survival instinct kicked in, and I scrambled back to my car. I started the engine, my hand shaking, and threw it into reverse. I drove back the way I'd come, my eyes fixed on the winding road ahead, desperate to find the exit back to the highway. I drove for what felt like hours, but the road never ended. It just kept winding through the same stretch of forest, the same trees, the same gray sky. I looked at my GPS, and it was still blank. I looked at my phone, and there was no signal, no service. I was completely, utterly alone. I drove back to the rest area. The sun was starting to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the lot. The pristine building glowed in the fading light, and the vending machines hummed their cheerful tune. I didn't know what else to do. I was trapped. I pulled into a spot and parked. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the light die, listening to the silence. I slept in my car that night, and the next, and the next. I lost count of the days. The rest area never changed. The lights never flickered. The vending machines never ran out of food and drink. I'd wake up, walk to the building, buy a soda and a bag of chipatis, and then wander around the empty lot trying to find a way out. I'd walk into the forest, hoping to find a path, a trail, anything. But the trees were too thick, the undergrowth too dense. I'd always end up back at the rest area, that gleaming, silent monument to my own private hell. I started to lose track of time. The days blended together, each one a perfect replica of the last. The sun rose and set, but the temperature never changed. The air was always cold and still. I started to talk to myself, just to hear a human voice. I'd tell stories, recite old songs, anything to break the deafening silence. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. I never saw anyone, but I could feel eyes on me from the forest, from the shadowed corners of the rest area. I'd spin around, expecting to see the man in the dirty suit, but there was never anyone there. On what I think was the fourth day, I heard it. A distant sound, like heavy machinery. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I ran to the edge of the rest area, where the road ended, and I watched the wall of kudzu. The sound grew louder, a rhythmic pounding, the roar of engines. And then the kudzu began to part. It didn't tear or break, it just moved, as if it were a curtain being pulled aside. Beyond it, I could see a new road, freshly paved, leading away from the rest area. I didn't hesitate. I ran to my car, started it, and drove straight through the opening. The road was smooth, the lines bright and white. I drove faster than I'd ever driven, my hands gripping the wheel, my eyes fixed on the pavement ahead. I didn't look back. I just drove and drove until I saw a familiar sign, a familiar exit, a familiar highway. I merged onto the interstate, my heart pounding with relief. I found a gas station a few miles down the road. I pulled in, filled up my tank, and went inside to pay. The cashier was a young kid, chewing gum and scrolling through his phone. I pulled out my wallet, and I noticed my hands looked different, older, more wrinkled. I looked in the mirror by the register, and I barely recognized the face staring back at me. I had more gray hair, deeper lines around my eyes. I was older. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy, and checked the date. It was 3 years later. I had been in that rest area for 3 days, but 3 years had passed in the real world. My family thought I was dead. My job was gone. My life had moved on without me. I walked out of the gas station and I stood in the parking lot, staring at the mountains in the distance. The sun was setting, and it looked just like it had on that first day, the day I took that wrong turn. I don't drive through the Smokies anymore. I don't use GPS. And I especially don't stop at rest areas, because I know that some roads, once you take them, you can never truly come back. I'm still not sure I did. Sometimes late at night, I'll look at my hands and wonder if they're getting older faster than they should. Sometimes I'll hear a faint hum, like a vending machine, in the dead of night. And sometimes, when I look out my window, I see a wall of kudzu just for a second before it disappears. I don't know if I escaped or if I'm still there, trapped in that pristine, empty place, buying sodas from a machine that never runs out. I don't know anything anymore. All I know is that I'm never going back. I'd been on the road for 12 hours, trying to beat the storm that every weatherman on every channel had been screaming about for days. They said it was going to be a bad one, the kind that shuts down interstates and leaves people stranded in their cars for days on end. I didn't listen. I had places to be, deadlines to meet, a life that didn't have room for a little snow. The first flakes started falling around 4 in the afternoon, light and harmless, like powdered sugar dusting the windshield. By 6, the world had turned white, and the highway had become a parking lot. I crept along at 5 miles an hour, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, watching the taillights of the car in front of me disappear and reappear through the swirling snow. The wind howled like something alive, shaking my car, and I knew I had to get off the road. The exit for Roanoke appeared like a miracle, a glowing green sign that promised shelter. I took it following a line of other desperate travelers, and found myself at a rest stop that was already overflowing with people. The parking lot was packed with cars, trucks, and RVs, all of them covered in a thick layer of snow. The building itself was a low, concrete structure, the kind that's designed for function, not comfort. I found a spot near the back, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, listening to the wind battering my car. The air inside was cold, my breath forming small clouds, and I knew I needed to get inside. I grabbed my coat and trudged through the ankle-deep snow toward the entrance. The main building was chaos. People were everywhere, huddled on benches, sprawled on the floor, their faces etched with exhaustion and anxiety. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, wet wool, and the faint, acrid tang of body odor. A vending machine hummed in the corner, its lights flickering, and a television mounted on the wall was showing a weather map covered in red and white. The storm wasn't going anywhere. I bought a cup of coffee from a machine, the liquid thin and bitter, and found a spot against the wall to stand and drink it. I watched the people around me, strangers thrown together by circumstance, and I felt a strange sense of camaraderie. We were all in this together, all trapped by the same relentless storm. That feeling didn't last. I had to use the bathroom, and I made my way through the crowd to the men's room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly green glow on the tile floor. It was quieter in there, the sounds of the main building muffled. There were a few other men at the urinals, and one older man washing his hands at the sink. I did my business, and as I was zipping up, I noticed a figure in the corner of my eye. I turned, and there was a man standing in the corner, just standing there, facing the wall. He wasn't using the facilities, wasn't washing his hands, wasn't doing anything. He just stood there, perfectly still. He was wearing a heavy, dark coat, the kind you'd see in an old war movie, and a wool cap pulled down low over his head. His posture was strange, almost rigid, like a mannequin. I couldn't see his face from where I was standing, just the back of his coat and the cap. I figured he was drunk, or maybe on something, or maybe just a weirdo who had wandered in off the highway. I ignored him. went to the sink, and washed my hands. I glanced at him in the mirror, and that's when my blood ran cold. In the reflection, I couldn't see his face. Where his face should have been, there was just a pale, indistinct blur, like a photograph that had been smeared while the ink was still wet. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The blur was still there. It wasn't a trick of the light, wasn't a shadow. It was as if his face simply didn't exist. I left the bathroom as fast as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was tired and stressed, that my mind was playing tricks on me. I found my spot against the wall, finished my coffee, and tried to calm down. I convinced myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, a reflections off the mirror, a momentary lapse in my perception. I was fine. Everything was fine. Then I saw him again. He was standing by the vending machines, his back to me, his coat dark and heavy. I watched him for a long moment, waiting for him to move, to do something, but he just stood there. I walked over to a trucker who was sitting on a bench, a big man with a bushy beard and a flannel shirt. He was nursing a cup of coffee and staring at the floor. "Hey," I said, my voice low. "You see that guy over there, by the machines?" The trucker looked up, squinted in the direction I was pointing, and then looked back at me. "There's nobody there, friend," he said. "You been hitting the sauce?" I looked back, and the man was gone, just vanished. I scanned the room, but I couldn't find him anywhere. A cold dread settled in my stomach, a feeling that something was very, very wrong. I spent the next few hours trying to stay awake, watching the door, watching the windows, waiting for him to reappear. But he didn't. The storm raged outside, and the people in the rest stopped, settled in for the night, their conversations dying down, the only sounds the wind and the occasional cough. I decided to go back to my car. It was cramped and cold, but at least it was private. I could lock the doors, put the seat back, and try to get some sleep. I was drifting off, the sound of the wind a faint lullaby, when I felt a presence. I opened my eyes, and there he was, standing right outside my driver's side window, his faceless head pressed against the glass. The frost on the window obscured his features, but I could see the outline of his cap, the dark shape of his coat. I screamed, a raw animal sound that tore from my throat. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I jammed them into the ignition, my eyes locked on that terrifying blank silhouette. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. I fumbled for the headlights, and when I turned them on, he was gone. Just like that. Vanished. I sat there, panting, my heart pounding, my hands still trembling. I looked at the windshield, and there it was. A single, clear handprint, perfectly formed, pressed into the frost. The fingers were long and slender, the palm narrow. It was the handprint of someone who had been standing there, pressing their face against my window. But there were no footprints in the snow. No tracks leading to my car, no tracks leading away. Just that single, impossible handprint. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car, the engine running, the heat blasting, my eyes fixed on the windshield. I watched the handprint slowly fade as the frost melted, and I watched the snow pile up around my car. I was terrified, but I was also frozen, unable to move, unable to do anything but wait for the dawn. When the sun finally came up, it was a weak, pale light, but it was enough. The snow had stopped and the sky was clearing. The plows had been out, and the roads were passable. People started to emerge from the rest stop, stretching, laughing, talking. They were happy to be leaving, happy that their little adventure was over. I got out of my car, my legs stiff and cold, and walked around to the driver's side. The handprint was gone. There was no trace of it. I looked at the ground, and there were no footprints, just the smooth, untouched snow. I told myself it was nothing, just a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. I got back in my car and joined the line of traffic heading back to the highway. The drive was uneventful. The sun was bright and the world was clean and white. I found myself relaxing the terror of the night before fading into a vague, uncomfortable memory. I was almost to the interstate when I glanced in my rearview mirror. The rest stop was shrinking behind me, a small, dark shape in the distance. And there, standing in the middle of the empty parking lot, was the man. He was waving. Just a slow, deliberate wave, his arm moving back and forth. I couldn't see his face, just the dark shape of his coat, the outline of his cap. He was waving goodbye. I slammed on the gas, my heart lurching in my chest. I didn't look back again. I just drove as fast as I could until the rest stop was long gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection, a memory playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw, and I still see him sometimes. In crowded rooms, in the corner of my eye, standing by a vending machine. He's always there, just standing, waiting. And sometimes I wonder if he's still waving. We'd been on the road for hours, trying to make it to the coast before dawn. My girlfriend, Sarah, had been dozing in the passenger seat, her head lolling against the window, while I drove through the endless stretch of Carolina darkness. The highway was empty, just the occasional set of headlights in the distance, and the radio had long since faded to static. I was running on coffee and determination, my eyes heavy, my thoughts blurry. Sarah stirred, stretched, and looked at me with that sleepy smile I loved. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. "Somewhere in the Carolinas," I said. "I think we're about an hour out from the coast." She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and looked out the window at the blackness. "I need to pee," she said. "Can we stop?" I saw the sign for a rest area a few seconds later, a green rectangle glowing in the dark. I flicked on my blinker and pulled off the highway. The rest area was small, just a low building surrounded by trees, the parking lot mostly empty. There was one other car parked near the entrance, a dark sedan, but no sign of anyone around. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, the only sound the idling of my engine and the distant hum of the highway. "I'll be right back," Sarah said, grabbing her coat. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, then got out of the car. I watched her walk toward the building, her silhouette small against the harsh fluorescent lights. She disappeared inside, and I settled back in my seat, pulling out my phone to check the time. It was just past midnight. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. I started to get restless. I looked at the building waiting for her to emerge, but the door stayed closed. I figured she was just taking her time, maybe fixing her makeup or something. But then 20 minutes went by and my restlessness turned to unease. Sarah was never gone this long. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent her a text, but it didn't go through. The signal was weak, just a single bar that flickered in and out. I got out of the car, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The parking lot was silent, the only sound the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel. I walked toward the building, my breath forming small clouds in the night air. The light from the window spilled out onto the pavement, casting long, distorted shadows. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The women's room was at the end of a short hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear a faint humming sound coming from inside. I called her name, but there was no answer. I pushed the door open, and the humming stopped. The room was empty. The fluorescent lights were flickering, casting a sickly, strobing light on the white tile floor. The hand dryers were going off on their own, one after another, a low, mechanical roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They'd blast for a few seconds, then go silent, only to start up again a moment later. It was a chaotic, unsettling sound like a machine that had lost its mind. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing off the tiles. No response. I checked each stall, pushing the doors open one by one. They were all empty. The sinks were dry, the mirrors clean. There was no sign of her. I was about to leave, to go check the main building, when I heard it. A faint, distorted voice, coming from somewhere deep in the plumbing. It was a whisper, but it was unmistakable. It was Sarah's voice. "Help me," it said, echoing through the pipes, muffled and metallic. "I can't get out." My heart lurched in my chest. I spun around, looking for the source of the voice. It seemed to be coming from the sink, the drain, the pipes that ran through the walls. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the sink, and I heard it again. "I can't get out. Please." There was something else too, a sound underneath the words. A faint rushing sound, like water flowing through a dark tunnel. I stepped back, my mind racing. I looked at the stalls, at the empty room, and I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. Something was very, very wrong. I walked over to the main stall, the one at the end of the row. The door was closed, and I could hear a faint dripping sound coming from inside. I kicked the door open, and what I saw made me stumble backward. The mirror inside was covered in a thick layer of condensation. It was like looking at a frosted window, impossible to see through. The sink was overflowing with water, but it wasn't clear water. It was black, brackish, like the water from a stagnant pond. It was spilling over the edges, pooling on the floor, a dark spreading stain. And then I saw the hand, pressed against the glass from the other side. Her hand. I recognized the ring, the one I'd given her for our anniversary. Her fingers were pressed flat against the mirror, smearing the condensation, leaving trails in the moisture. She was on the other side. "Sarah!" I screamed. I pounded on the glass, but there was no response. The hand just pressed there, unmoving. I looked at the mirror, at the reflection of the empty bathroom behind me, and I realized with a jolt that there was no reflection of me. The mirror showed the room, but I wasn't in it. It was like I had become invisible, like I was the ghost. I didn't think, I just acted. I stepped back, raised my elbow, and slammed it into the glass. It shattered, pieces falling into the sink, into the black water. The water stopped flowing. The hand disappeared. I stood there, breathing hard, looking at the empty space where the mirror used to be. There was nothing there, just a dark, empty hole in the wall, a void that seemed to swallow the light. There was no one behind it. No Sarah, no hand, just blackness. I ran out of the bathroom, out of the building, my heart pounding in my ears. I sprinted across the parking lot, my feet slipping on the gravel, and I threw open the car door. Sarah was sitting in the passenger seat, slumped against the window, sound asleep. She was breathing peacefully, her face relaxed, as if she'd never left. I slammed the door, and she startled awake, her eyes wide with confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice groggy. "What happened?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at her hands, at the ring on her finger. I looked at her face, and she looked back at me with that familiar, sleepy expression. She had no memory of the rest area. She said she'd been sleeping the whole time, that I must have dreamed it. I didn't tell her what I saw. I couldn't. I started the car, pulled out of the lot, and didn't look back. I drove the rest of the way to the coast in silence, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind replaying the image of her hand pressed against that mirror. For the rest of our trip, everything seemed normal. We went to the beach, we ate at restaurants, we laughed and talked. But there was something different about Sarah. She'd complain about a constant ringing in her ears, a sound like static, like a radio that couldn't find a station. She'd rub her temples and say it was driving her crazy. And she refused to drive past another rest stop for the rest of our trip. She wouldn't even look at them. She'd just stare straight ahead, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap, until we were well past them. We never talked about that night, not once. She never asked what happened, and I never told her. But sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, I'd hear a faint whisper coming from the pipes. It would echo through the walls, a soft, desperate plea. and I'd remember the feeling of that black water soaking through my shoes, the sound of her voice coming from the drain, and the image of that hand pressing against the glass, trying to get out of a place that shouldn't exist. I'd lie there in the dark, listening to her sleep, and I'd wonder if the woman next to me was really Sarah, or if she was something else, something that came back through that mirror, something that was still wearing her face. I'd wonder if I'd ever truly find out. And I knew, with a cold, sinking certainty, that I didn't want to know. Because some doors once opened can never be closed, and some roads once taken lead to places you can never return from.